Rick. I want to thank you all for participating. For those that listened to the webinar in March entitled Could Texas Become the Largest Solar Opportunity in the World? An update on the ERCOT resource adequacy situation. Well, this will be an update to that update. So for those who didn't hear it, we'll provide a little bit of a description of ERCOT, and it's a reminder for those who did participate as well. And I'll go through these slides relatively quickly initially. ERCOT is about 85% of Texas, shown here in the darker blue, so it doesn't include all the land area, but it's about 85% of the area of Texas and about 85% of the load as well. The major load centers are Dallas and Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, and Corpus Christi. So these load centers make sort of the number 7 from the area out in West Texas, where you have some load centers, Midland, Odessa, and Abilene, and then down toward the Houston and San Antonio, Corpus Christi area. So that's briefly what the ERCOT system looks like. Now, a little bit more about it. ERCOT is essentially an island. It's electrically about the size of the system in the United Kingdom. And shown here with the stars are the location of all the high voltage direct current ties between Texas, or what's called the Texas Interconnection, or ERCOT, and the Eastern Interconnection in blue. There are no ties with the Western Interconnection in green. Now, there are 3 ties across the border to CFE in Mexico. The total of all these ties is about capability is about 1,100 megawatts, and that may sound like a lot of power, but compared to the load in ERCOT, it is relatively small amount. And here you'll see that. These are the numbers from 2012, showing both on the left the installed capacity of the generation in ERCOT, and you can see there was about 70,000 megawatts of installed capacity in 2012. Now 2013 was a little bit more. The energy produced in ERCOT, 325,000 gigawatt hours, is shown on the right, and you can see that there's a difference in the sizes of the pieces of this pie. So coal, although it was 23% of the capacity, actually produced 34% of the energy, and natural gas 57%, and produced less than that in terms of energy. If you would have looked at these numbers in 2010, 11, the years prior to this, 10 and 11, you would have seen that coal had a greater percentage, but due to the low price of natural gas has increased its percentage. Nuclear, as you can see, makes up a significant portion, 12% of the energy. But hydro, biomass, all the other renewables, with the exception of wind, make up a very small part. Wind is 13%, which is quite a large percentage of capacity, but only produces about 9% of the energy, simply because the wind just doesn't blow all the time. So let's move on to a couple more facts and figures. ERCOT is 200,000 square miles in area, about 40,000 miles of transmission, and more is being built all the time. The peak capacity, the amount of generation that's available from all sources on peak, a little bit different than the number you saw before, but it's roughly 74,000 megawatts, or 74 gigawatts if you'd like to look at it that way. We have about 10,500 megawatts of wind generation, more than any other state and more than all but 5 countries in the world. The peak, summer peak of 2013, this past summer, was just over 67,000 megawatts. That's an increase over 2012, slight increase, but it's a reduction from the all-time peak of over 68,000 megawatts in 2011. That was, as you recall, I'm sure the hottest year on record in Texas. And the target reserve margin, and we'll talk a good bit about this in a moment, but the target reserve margin in ERCOT is 13.75%. That is the amount of capacity that is available above the load on peak. So that's if the peak load is 67,180 megawatts, as shown here in 2013, the ideal, the target reserve margin would be 13.75% above that. Now, ERCOT is a growing market. The projected load growth for 2014 to 2022, this period, and this is an ERCOT projection, is 1.5% per year, or about 1,050 megawatts per year. That's down from the previous forecast that was over 2% and close to 3% in a couple of years. That doesn't sound like maybe like a lot, 1.5%, but it's equivalent to a nuclear power plant each year, or 2 new coal plants each year, or a couple of combined cycle gas plants each year. So it's a significant amount of load growth, and something that certainly has to be dealt with. Now, ERCOT puts out what's called capacity, demand, and reserve reports twice a year, normally in December in advance of the winter season and in May in advance of the summer season. And you can see here the differences between those between two of those reports. What they do is they look at the out years, they look at the load that they know or they project will be out there to serve, and then they look at the generation resources that will be available. And the generation resources that will be available are those that have an interconnection agreement with the transmission system. And if they are a fossil-fueled unit, they have to have an air permit as well. So once they have one, if it's a wind turbine, for instance, they would not have to have an air permit. But once they have those requirements met, then ERCOT considers them part of the resource plan or part of this capacity demand reserve report. And so what these numbers reflect are the reserves after you consider what the load will be, their projections, and the amount of generation that will be available. So it does not include any generation that is speculative or people have talked about or somebody's announced. It only includes that generation that has an air permit and an interconnection permit. And you can see the target reserve margin shown here is 13.75. And so if you look at the blue bars, that's the projection from ERCOT in December 2012. And you can see that the reserve margins out in the 2022 timeframe were quite low, and quite low actually starting in 2014. And so that brought about some concern. And as a result of that, as a result of the hot summer we had in 2011 and some of these projected reserve margins, the PUC started to consider what they might do to incent the build of new generation to close this gap between the expected reserve margin and the target. Now, again, the red bars show the next projection, which is much better. It certainly extends the problem or alleviates the problem for 2014. And the large change between the December 2012 and May 2013 reports is mainly due to the addition of a couple of thousand megawatts of new capacity. So the low projected reserve margins, along with the system challenges due to the hot summer of 2011, led the PUC to focus on resource adequacy, and that effort began in the fall of 2011 and continues today. Let's take a look at this in a little bit different way. If you look at the now here we have the reserve margins depicted in a line as opposed to a bar, but 3 reserve margins that were from the 2012 May CDR, the December 2012 CDR, the next one, and the May 2013 CDR. So what you can see here is that the reserve margins with each one of these successive reports improve in every out year. And so this is not atypical. This is normally what occurs with the capacity demand reserve report. As you get closer to the year the year in question, the reserve margin tends to increase. But you can see that in 2012, May 2012, it was quite low, and that brought out a great deal of concern. So the reduction in demand varied from about 1,000 megawatts in 2014. In other words, this was a combination of the adjustment in the projected demand for energy and the addition of new capacity. So the reduction in demand in ERCOT's forecast varied from about 1,000 megawatts in 2014 up to about 5,000 megawatts in 2022, and that's reflective of the change in the growth rate of growth of load. And then on the capacity side, there was a net addition of about 3,000 megawatts, of 5,300 megawatts added over this period, and 2,300 canceled. And by the 5,300 megawatts added, or 5,300 megawatts added, that is only megawatts that have an air permit and an interconnection permit. So if we look at the reserve margins, In another way, you can see that 2011, 2012, 2013, the reserve margin, the actual, and these are actual reserve margins, are climbing toward the 13.75. So in 2011, the hottest summer on record, we actually had almost 8% reserve margin on peak at the time of the highest demand. 2012, we had about 9%. 2013, we had about 10%. And so while we didn't achieve the 13.75, we certainly had a lot of reserves available. Is it enough? Well, that's a question we'll talk about a little bit more here in a minute. So why is resource adequacy an issue? Well, it's an issue because the low natural gas prices reduce the financial the ability of new resources to finance. If they can't get significant revenues for their generation, they simply can't get the financing to build it. And so this low gas price environment discourages new investment as new plants become uneconomic, and gas prices are forecast to remain low. The power price, the price that a generator would get for his power, is determined largely in this market by the natural gas price. So if the natural gas price is down, generally the power price is down. Well, in almost all cases, the power price is down. And so that low power price, which is a function of the low natural gas price, is what has caused the problem. And the demand growth just makes the capacity problem worse. We have a larger demand growth in most parts of the country, and that just makes the capacity versus load problem even worse. Prices in the energy market, the energy-only market, which is what we currently have in ERCOT, have not been allowed to rise to levels that would incent the financing and construction of new power plants, and only recently have these price caps been increased. Texas is expected to continue to experience significant load growth, again, an average of 1.3% over the next 10 years and over 3% in 2014, 2018. Those were the old numbers, and you can see that that's changed somewhat in the numbers we looked at previously. So, what are the questions? Well, the questions that the PUC is considering are these. What can we do to get people to build new capacity, and especially peaking capacity, because the ERCOT system is very peaky. That is, there's high loads in the summer relative to low loads in the spring and in the fall, and the difference between those two can be dramatic. And so there are times of the year when peaking capacity would be very valuable, and this market is what I would consider to be a baseload heavy market. It has a lot of baseload generation that is not capable of peaking, and it has minimal peaking capacity. So the object is to incent the development of new capacity, and especially peaking capacity. And one of the questions is, can the current energy-only market be changed to provide the necessary incentives? Or should we go to some form of a capacity market, such as exists in PJM up in the Northeast, in ISO New England, in New York, the New York ISO? Do we need a capacity market like that to ensure adequate resources are available when they're needed? And let me talk about that just a bit, because in the regulated world, prior to deregulation of the ERCOT system in 2001, the regulated system essentially did that. They paid generators, or in that time the incumbent utilities were paid effectively to build new generation in advance of need, and so they were earning money on the projects that they were building even before they were in service. This is called a capacity payment. That has not existed since 2001, and so some believe that we should move back to a capacity market to ensure that those resources are available when they're needed. For some people, that is a move back to or something close to the regulated world. I'll leave that to your opinion. And then finally, are the methods that we use for forecasting demand and resource growth appropriate? I mean, after all, the reason that we're dealing with this issue at all, or one of the major reasons, is that this capacity demand reserves report that we looked at shows that we won't have adequate reserves in the out years. But are the methods that we use for forecasting load, and then the methods that we use for including new capacity resources in the system, are they proper? So that's another question. So what has the Commission done? Well, the Commission has basically, this is a Public Utility Commission, through over the last 2 years has done a number of things to encourage or to provide more revenue to basically to peaking generators. And they've raised the system-wide offer cap. That is the amount that a participant can charge in the balancing energy market to these levels. The level has been down in the $2,000 per megawatt range for some time, and it has now been raised up to currently $5,000 beginning this past summer. It will be $7,000 per megawatt hour beginning in June 2014 and $9,000 beginning in June 2015. Ideally, in an energy-only market, there would not be any limitation on the amount that could be charged on peak. It could go to whatever level it needed to go to bring the proper resources in. And some would argue that if you allowed that to happen, that it would provide sufficient resources or sufficient revenue to incent the build of new capacity. But we don't know that because we've had these limitations on the system-wide offer amount for years. They also developed a process for recalling mothballed units. Mothballed units are those that really are uneconomic for whatever reason, and the utilities or the owners have chosen to not to retire them or tear them down, but put them in a state of suspended animation, if you will, or what we call mothballed units. So the PUC has come up with a process for bringing some of those units, and they do a study to figure out which ones and how many megawatts, some of those units back into service to make sure there's sufficient reserve or sufficient capacity available over the peak. That results in capacity payments and other payments beyond just an energy payment to these mothballed units that come back on the system. But again, that is not so much to incent the build of new capacity. In fact, it may actually go counter to that, but it's to make sure that we have adequate reliability. Also, the PUC has developed better pricing. There's lots of nuances, lots of pieces and parts to this, but basically better pricing for ancillary services. These are reliability types of services that have to go along with energy, and what's called reliability unit commitment units that are there to make sure there's reliability. So they get better revenue for those units. The next item is the peaker net margin, and this is the amount of money that a peaker can make by operating at relatively few hours during the year, but at very high revenue. So at $5,000 a megawatt hour beginning this last summer, a peaker could earn up to $300,000, or basically 3 times the cost of new entry. That was the limit that the PUC decided, and they raised that from $175,000 per megawatt. And then there's an obscure curve called the operating reserve demand curve. Is going to be designed to increase prices during scarcity periods instead of the price going immediately to the offer cap when we have very high loads and relatively low amounts of reserves. It would essentially slope up as you got closer to the point where you have scarcity. That curve would slope, and it would provide a better pricing signal to bring capacity into service and provide more revenue for those units that were able to provide that service. And then the final action that the PUC took, and I'll tell you that this action was taken last Friday and caused me a great deal of angst in putting together this webinar, because it changed a lot of the issues associated with this problem, and that is they decided on a 2-to-1 vote, and a very contentious one at that, to have a mandatory versus a target reserve margin. So let me talk briefly about that, because it's a very, very important issue. First of all, the mandatory reserve margin decision was supported by Commissioners Marty. Commissioner Marty is the newest commissioner appointed by the governor just this last summer, and Commissioner Nelson, the chair, they voted for this mandatory reserve margin. Very, very vocally opposed by Commissioner Anderson, who is in favor more of continuing with the energy-only market with fixes. Senator Troy Frazier, who is the chairman of the Senate Natural Resources Committee, has also opposed this action, and he claims that this action by the PUC is beyond their authority, and he will hold a hearing and bring the commissioners in to question them about why they made this decision when it is outside of their authority. Whether it really is outside of their authority or not, I'll leave to the attorneys, but certainly Senator Frazier thinks that it is. One other thing that Senator Frazier did was to, a couple of months ago, was to write a letter to the Public Utility Commission when they were considering whether to raise the target reserve margin from 13.75% to 16.1% as recommended by ERCOT. He wrote the commission and effectively said, don't do it because you will almost guarantee a capacity market if you do that. Obviously, Senator Frazier opposes a capacity market. He was part of the legislation that developed the current energy-only market, and so we'll see where that goes. Stay tuned. But is this a first step toward a capacity market? Well, I'll let you be the judge of that, but I'll tell you this, that if we don't have sufficient resources, or if ERCOT projects there aren't sufficient resources out some period of time, usually in most capacity markets about 3 years out, then something has to happen to incent the build of that new capacity. There are essentially two ways to do it. You can, the regulator, or the PUC and ERCOT in this case, can hold an auction to ensure that there's adequate capacity. That is, they have generators bid to provide that generation a certain amount of time out. They are paid to do that. Whether that generation turns out to be needed 3 years out or not is probably incidental. They're going to get that payment anyway. And so what it does is it provides a capacity payment in advance of bringing the unit or the generation into operation, much like the regulated market used to do with what was called construction work in progress. So that's one way. The other way is to require the retail electric providers to buy capacity from generators to support the load that they serve. So let's say a retail electric provider serves 100 megawatts of load, and the mandatory reserve margin is 13.75%, they would be required to provide 13.75 megawatts of reserves over peak to back up, if you will, their system, provide reliability for their customers. And both of those methods are used in capacity markets elsewhere. One of the problems with the last one is not only that maybe the capacity won't be needed when it's projected to be needed, but some retail electric providers may not have the credit capacity to be able to negotiate or to be able to buy capacity that far out. So there are problems with both of these, and both of them are subject to the Commission's ability to accurately, to ERCOT's ability to accurately forecast load and resources. So what's been going on in ERCOT? What has ERCOT done? I've talked about what the PUC did, but here's what ERCOT's done. They've increased their wind reliability factor from 8.7% to 14.2% for West Texas wind. That is, in the past, from a capacity standpoint, ERCOT only counted 8.7% of the wind. So if you had 1,000 megawatts of wind, you only counted 87 megawatts toward capacity. Now you can count 14.2%, or if you have 1,000 megawatts, you can count 142 megawatts toward reliable capacity. And you can see the numbers from 8.7, 32.9% for coastal wind, because coastal wind is more constant and much higher capacity factor. The result of doing those two things added 900 megawatts of reliable resource to the system, as if somebody built a couple of combined cycle plants. So that's improved. That's one of the things that's improved the capacity demand reserves report, or the level of reserves. And you'll see that reflected next in the December issue of the capacity demand reserves reports put out by ERCOT. Another thing that ERCOT is doing is they're revising their load forecasting methodology. So the two sides of this, the load forecasting, side of it, they're going to take a look at to make sure that the loads there, that the amount of load they're projecting out into the outer years is accurate as they can make it, understanding that we don't have a crystal ball and neither do they. They're also working on some new demand response initiatives, that is to reduce the amount of demand by providing various mechanisms for customers to reduce their usage during peak periods. So ERCOT's busy and not only doing these things, but supporting whatever the PUC would like them to study. Some of the things that the PUC, given the stuff we've talked about already in terms of the mandatory reserve margin and that sort of thing, there are a couple of things, very important things, that the PUC will have to consider. And one of them is this first one. What is the appropriate level of reserve margin? I mentioned earlier that ERCOT recommended 16.1%. That's based on limiting the amount of potential outage time that you could have if something devastating happened to the system. NERC uses, that's the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. They have a 15% reference reserve margin, not mandatory, but that's what they say is pretty much the standard. ERCOT, again, as I mentioned, had until recently a 13.75% target reserve margin. Now there's a mandatory reserve margin. Is that 13.75 or what is it? But that's the next question. What should that mandatory reserve margin be and how should it be insured? And if that reserve margin is significantly higher than 13.75%, that means that more resources are going to have to be contracted in the forward market, either by ERCOT and the PUC or by retail electric providers. Obviously, if it's lower than 13.75%, then less will have to be contracted in the forward market. And all of that contracting in the forward market, whether it be a lot or little, is incremental dollars that the customer is going to have to pay. So what's the PUC looking at right now? They're looking at how can the CDR, the Capacity Demand Reserve Report, be improved? Can it be used to measure the ERCOT's progress in achieving the planning reserve margin? That is it useful for determining what that reserve margin might be, now a mandatory reserve margin? They're waiting on a report from the Brattle Group. The Brattle Group is going to report on a number of different things relative to this resource adequacy issue. And they're also waiting on the ERCOT Capacity Demand Reserves report that's due in December. So that's what's going on. Now the players, it's very interesting if you want to have a good time, although most of it's boring, it occasionally gets exciting. You can listen to the webcasts or the videos of the PUC open meetings, and it gets kind of, last Friday's meeting, the 25th of October, was pretty exciting toward the end. But here are the players, the generators, the people that generate power and would get the payments from a capacity market, whether they come from the auction or from the retail electric providers. In any event, they're going to come from the customers ultimately. They support a capacity market. Obviously, it means more dollars for them. But many consumers don't support it because they're the ones that are going to have to pay, and they would prefer continuing with the energy-only market with improvements, that is, with tweaks, and we've already made tweaks to the market and not really taken time to see if they're going to work or not, but tweaks to the market to improve the energy-only market as it is. Commissioner Anderson, who is in favor of continuing with the energy-only market and is adamantly opposed to a capacity market, argues that ERCOT has adequate reserves if you count them properly through 2018. New Commissioner Brandy Marty, who came from the governor's staff and was appointed in August, she'll be the swing vote, and it now seems, after the vote on last Friday, it seems that she favors a capacity market. But we'll see. I don't want to pin her with that at this point, but that's certainly what it looks like at this point, because the action that they took, as I mentioned earlier, really does portend a capacity market. So what is a capacity market? Well, it can take lots of different forms, but typically it provides the generators a guaranteed revenue stream sufficient to pay their full cost of production for adding new assets that meet the needs, usually about 3 years out, 3 years in advance of the delivery year. And this can include existing and new capacity. Our current market has some of the attributes of a capacity market, and we talked about that before, we've returned mothballed units to service on peak. We've done that for the last 3 years. We've increased the system-wide offer cap, the peaker net margin, ancillary service payments. All these are capacity-related issues. So we do already have some attributes of a capacity market. This slide shows some of the questions that the chairman, the PUC chairman, who is obviously in favor of a capacity market, has asked after the October 25th meeting during which the decision was made on a 2-to-1 vote to go to a mandatory reserve margin. And these questions, I won't read the questions to you, but these questions, if you look at them, essentially are questions about not should there be a capacity market, but how are we going to construct a capacity market? What is it going to look like? So it's pretty clear that the PUC chairman has gone beyond just maybe we should consider a capacity market, or that's something we ought to really seriously consider and look at in detail, to, okay, we're going to have a capacity market, how should we construct it? So that's what these questions clearly indicate, to me at least, which essentially creates some amount at least of certainty. If we're going to have a capacity market now, the next thing we need to do is determine what's it going to look like, who can participate, and that sort of thing. So where do we go from here? What do we do now? Well, there's going to be more PUC workshops, more deliberations, more rulemakings. There's really not a capacity issue until 2015 when the reserve margin drops to 11.6. The 2013 legislature did not address the resource capacity or resource adequacy issue. My guess is that they will in 2015. Now, it's critical to remember that they are not going to meet until 2015. So if they disagree with this decision of the PUC to create a capacity market, there really is nothing they can do to reverse that decision until January of 2015, and lots of things can happen in that period of time. Well, my opinion, if you would have asked me this question a month ago, I would have said that we may have a capacity market at some time, but it's a long ways off. Now I think we're going to have a capacity market. Probably we will begin to construct that market in early 2014. That doesn't mean it's going to be in effect or going to be in place or going to have a capacity auction or anything like that in 2014. I think that will take months, if not years, to put in place. But I think the decision will be made. At least the chairman, Nelson, and Commissioner Marty believe that that decision will be made in 2014. So I can't discount that. They have a 2-to-1 majority. The addition of a forward capacity market will bring higher costs for consumers, but the continuation of an energy-only market will also bring higher costs to consumers due to the tweaks necessary to incent new capacity. I think a forward capacity market will have minimal renewable participation. That is, since we're looking for reliable capacity, generally renewables, as you saw with the wind reliability numbers, is not considered to be greatly reliable, and so it may not be allowed to participate. In most auctions, most states that have, or areas that have capacity auctions, renewables are included only if there is a requirement for renewables in that jurisdiction. So, if there's a renewable portfolio standard, that is, and there's not one, or at least not one of any substance here in Texas. The potential consequences of a forward capacity market are also that you could have excess capacity. You could pay for excess capacity and then find out that you really didn't need it if your reserve forecasts are inaccurate. And we're trying to resolve that, as I mentioned earlier, too. And then there's always unanticipated and unintended consequences in both the energy-only market and the forward capacity market. And then one final downside or potential downside of the continuation of an energy-only market is maybe it will not produce, if we stick with an energy-only market, which again is highly unlikely now, we may not have sufficient capacity sometime in the future, which could affect the state from an economic standpoint, and we wouldn't want that to happen either. So there are downsides to both of them, but I think the key thing to think about is it's going to cost more no matter what we do. Now, let me transition a little bit and talk a little bit about renewables, and especially solar, but I'll talk a little bit about wind. You may have seen this before in my previous presentation, but this is the long-term assessment for the ERCOT region done about a year ago, and it says that natural gas and renewables are going to make up the biggest amount of new capacity in the state, and so far that's proven to be true. From a solar standpoint, Texas has outstanding solar resources. You can see on these two charts that, especially in West Texas, we have a lot of solar intensity that can be used. In fact, if you think about the ERCOT peak load at 68,000 megawatts or 68 gigawatts, if you just took the amount of PV that could be produced from the rural area of Texas, which is, and that would be about 20,000 gigawatts, 14% of the U.S. total, it's almost mind-boggling to think that if you just tapped 1% of that, just 1% of the potential rural photovoltaic capacity in Texas, that would be 3 times the amount of ERCOT's maximum load, or 200 gigawatts, 3 times the 68 gigawatt load in ERCOT. So it's just the amount of solar capability in Texas is phenomenal, and certainly can play a part, at least over time, in resolving this capacity issue, and maybe even taking over from a capacity standpoint. Another attribute, of course, of solar is it's synergistic with load. And you can see on this curve that the ERCOT load in the top blue, darker blue line peaks in the afternoon, typically on a summer day. The wind typically dips in the afternoon on a summer day, but solar obviously is going to peak pretty much in a synchronous way with the load. So that makes it highly valuable. And whereas the wind may only have a 14 to 32% reliability factor, solar ought to be a good bit higher, and I think we'll see that number here in a minute. Interestingly enough, in December 2012, in that capacity demand reserves report, there were no solar projects that ERCOT had in their pipeline, that had an interconnection permit. Today, there are 19 solar projects under evaluation, total of over 1,300 megawatts, and the size ranges all the way from 20 to 200 megawatts. All of these projects are scheduled for completion by the end of 2015. That's pretty quick, within 2 years. Now, certainly not all of them will be built, but I think a substantial number will. But you can see the dramatic move from December 2012 to today, how much that's changed. And if you look at the wind generation growth, it's just been phenomenal. Back in 2000, we had virtually no wind. And then today, we're up around just over 10,000 megawatts with another 3,000 megawatts or so in the pipeline. And you can see the little 2009, 2015, 2025 standards. Those are the renewable portfolio standards. And obviously, we've met all of those much in advance of the time when we needed to meet them. There is a part of the renewable portfolio standard here that says that there has to be 500 megawatts in addition to or other than wind, but it can be solar, it can be biomass, it can be any number of things. So there really is no there is no solar portfolio standard specifically. But you can see that how phenomenally rapidly the wind generation grew. Now, if you take a look at the solar potential, starting, of course, a few years later, I hope this is not too confusing, but what I did with this is I took the actual wind, the wind numbers, and actual up until 2013, and then projected beyond that. And then I applied those growth percentages to the current existing solar, which is minimal, 75 megawatts today. And you can see that by 2025, 2026, we could have 18,000 megawatts of solar in Texas if you have the same growth rate. I see no reason why you can't have the same growth rate. So this is something that I think is interesting to look at, and I think probably is not that far off. Now, the star down below is the number that is actually projected to exist in 2022, and that is from a study done primarily for transmission in the state, and it looks at what resources will be available in these out years, and so it's down around 2,500 megawatts or so. There were a number of different scenarios, but the typical scenario was about this, and so that's significantly below what it looks like we will have. So, you know, if wind can grow as rapidly as it has, then why can't solar? And we have a tremendous capability. Remember that we have the capability just in 1% of our area, rural area in Texas, to produce 200 gigawatts of power and 3 times what we have today. And this is only, we're looking at here in 2026, only less than 18 gigawatts. So there's a tremendous opportunity. Well, I've babbled on a lot, so let me sum this up. How do the recent changes at ERCOT affect you? Well, 3 ways. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty for some time to come, uncertainty around what the market will look like, what the capacity or whatever we call the market how it will be constructed, who will be allowed to play, how will the auction, if that works, be conducted, how will the retailers organize to get adequate reserves if they are the ones that have to get those reserves. In any event, the forward capacity market or a modified energy market will result in increased customer costs, no question, for reliability. And customers, I don't know how much these costs will be because we don't know what the market design will be, but they could be substantial, and customers will have a voice in that. So, but there are going to be increased costs. The renewable contribution, wind, solar, will increase, no question, and those will bring benefits like cleaner air and ultimately lower energy costs, because after all, these resources use no fuel whatsoever. So that's kind of the landscape at ERCOT right now. We're right in the middle of a very interesting period. I won't say contentious, but that's probably what it is. And we will see what happens over the next short period of time. Again, I'll remind you that a key senator has called the Public Utility Commission to task for making the mandatory reserve margin decision, and whether or not that results in any change is open to question. So we'll see what happens. Stay tuned.
All right, thank you very much, Ron. Great information there. And again, to our audience, and several people have already done this, you can chat questions for Ron. Please submit those to either all participants if you want to send the question to the entire audience, or to all panelists if you want to keep your name private. And you can chat through the lower right corner of your screen. All right, Ron, let's get started because we have quite a few questions that have come in here.
Okay.
So the first one from Richard: when the original deregulated market in Texas was designed, local distributed generation was not practical. And now that it is with solar, why doesn't the PUC revisit the market design to include the capabilities and growth of solar distributed generation, especially as it generates electricity when it's needed the most when the sun is shining?
Well, you know, that's a very good question. In some jurisdictions, unfortunately not ERCOT, some jurisdictions have begun to take into consideration the impact that distributed generation will have on this need for central station generation. In other words, this need for new capacity, because it could effectively lower the need for capacity growth substantially. The problem in Texas right now, I believe, with that, especially with respect to solar, is there's so little solar out there. There's only 75 megawatts of solar in the state with a 75,000 megawatt generation capability. So it simply does not rise to the level to get the Public Utility Commission's attention. And it hasn't even risen to the level to get the attention of the legislature. So it's going to take some lobbying, but I think what will really turn the tide is when we start to get some substantial amounts of solar, and those are in the pipeline. I mentioned that earlier, that there's 1,300 megawatts or so now in the pipeline, and so that will begin to attract attention. In fact, I think when we get over 200 megawatts, I think that's the right number, the Public Utility Commission, or ERCOT, really, ERCOT will assign a capacity value or a reliability capacity value to solar. Right now, the value of solar from a reliability standpoint is 100%. Again, that's opposed to the 14.2% for West Texas wind and the 32% or so for coastal wind. So it's 100%, but that's because there's so little of it. Once we get up to about 200 megawatts, you'll see the ERCOT assign a capacity value. Well, what will that be? Well, I think it could be anywhere in the range of 25 to 75%. I would hope it would be at the higher end of that because of the synergy with load and with the way the market peaks, especially in the summer. It's not only synergistic on a daily basis, but it's synergistic on an annual basis. So Again, the short answer is solar really hasn't risen to the level of attention or level of that it needs to be to get the attention of the PUC, and they've got lots of other issues to think about at this point. I can assure you, though, if there was a lot of solar or potential for solar, or developers were standing in the wings waiting to build large solar projects, 1,000 megawatts and more, that would get the PUC's attention. That would be included. But as it stands, there is no renewable portfolio standard specifically for solar. There is very little solar, and frankly, they have lots of other issues that they're dealing with.
Okay, and Jim had also submitted a question that was similar. I think we answered it there, Jim, but if we did not, please just submit another question. The next question came in from Dan. Did the increase in the wind reliability factors result from studying historical data? And I would add to that, do you think the wind reliability factors could be increased further?
Well, yeah, I mean, they resulted from a lot of different things on the part of ERCOT. I can't tell you specifically everything that happened, but ERCOT has been dealing with the wind and with substantial amounts of the wind for a long time now. And so they have better forecasting mechanisms. They know they know when the wind will blow. They know the characteristics of the turbines better, and so they have much more confidence in their ability predict what wind resources will be available and when they'll be available, and especially with coastal wind, which is a pretty constant flow of wind across those turbines. So it's just that they've gotten better in understanding the wind and the impact it has on the system. And by the way, we do have increased transmission to bring that wind power to market, which has been a big issue in the past. In the past, there's been transmission congestion from the wind areas in West Texas to the load centers farther east. That's been alleviated to a great extent by what's called the Competitive Renewable Energy Zones Transmission Build Project, some $7 billion worth of transmission designed to bring that wind power to market. So there have been a number of things that have happened that have increased the ERCOT's ability to more accurately predict when the wind will be available and how much will be available.
Okay, great. The next question came from Ross. His question was, ERCOT does not appear to provide incentives for residential solar. Why is this? So maybe you could describe how the Texas regulatory market works.
Well, there really, again, because there's no renewable portfolio standard, there really, for solar, there really is no state standard, state mandated or state offered program that I know of for rooftop solar. Now, there are jurisdictions all over the state, cities, municipalities, maybe even some co-ops, I don't know, some utility or retail electric providers, transmission distribution utilities. There are entities that provide these sorts of incentives, but not the PUC. The PUC's job is primarily to regulate the market, which sounds like an oxymoron, which it probably is. But their job is to provide for reliability and provide for a means to operate the market, and that's what ERCOT does for them. And so they really don't have any incentives to speak of, well, no incentives at all, for new generation of any type. And so, you know, wind has to rely on federal subsidies. Solar relies on federal subsidies, but there is no statewide program that I'm aware of for rooftop solar. And somebody can correct me if they know.
No, well, a follow-up question from Ross was if there's no standards for solar, then why does Encore offer incentives for residential solar?
Well, because again, the transmission and distribution utilities are the means by which the PUC can, or not the PUC, but there are the means by which you can provide some amount of renewables. Now, I think that's a good question, because I think that there are some requirements in the for the regulated entities, that is like Encore, like CenterPoint, the transmission and distribution utilities that remain regulated by the PUC. I think in their rate case issues and their mandate is to provide some amount of demand side management, and you know, they have the smart meter programs and probably some rooftop solar. I think that's optional to the transmission and distribution utility. They can do their demand side management in just about any way they choose. So, but those are programs that are encouraged and maybe even mandated by the Public Utility Commission, but they're provided by the regulated entities, the transmission and distribution utilities. And the reason that it doesn't, if you think about it, it doesn't really make sense for the transmission, the wires people, to do this. But they're the only vehicle through which the PUC can do this because they are the only regulated group out there. So there are some programs like that in a certain way mandated by the Public Utility Commission, but there is no statewide standard for all entities to provide this.
All right. The next question is from David. How does the generation capacity that's in the queue, how does that affect the projected reserve margins, and could this defer the move to a capacity market?
Well, that's a very, very good question. Again, the only way that generation that's not currently built gets into the queue, gets included in the capacity demand reserves report as capacity, is if it has an interconnection permit. That is, it has a permit from ERCOT to connect to the transmission system, and they've studied that and everything will work. And if it's a fossil-fueled plant, that it has an air permit, that is a permit from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality to emit certain emissions into the air. So if it has one of those two things, then it's included in the capacity demand reserves reports. But there are a lot or significant number of units out there, or projected units out there, that just don't have one of those yet. They will get them. They will get an air permit, or they will get an interconnection permit. They just haven't gotten to that point yet. But they're definitely planning or have the financing to be built. And so right now they're not countered. Maybe they will be when ERCOT reviews its methodology for determining what resources should be included. They're sort of walking a fine line, because a lot of the resources that are out there that do not have an interconnection permit or an air permit, whichever they need, or if they need both, will not be built. They're simply speculative, and ERCOT does not know which is which in all cases, so they have to be conservative. But remember, ERCOT's primary responsibility is ensuring reliability. Secondarily, they run the market, and so they're going to err on the side of being conservative when they think about reliability. And the way to do that is to estimate that there's going to be more load than you think than may really materialize, and there's going to be less generation. That provides a more conservative view of the future. So not that ERCOT is not responsible and very, very capable of doing that. They are very smart folks, and they can do a good job of that. But they do err on the side of being conservative, and that's part of their mandate.
Okay, Ron, next question was, can you tell us more about the 15 solar projects that you mentioned are under development, and are those included in the reserve margin projections?
Yeah, well, I don't have a list of them right in front of me, but they're included in the May 2013 CDR, Capacity Demand Reserve reports, that you can find on the ERCOT website. Perhaps, given a few minutes, I could find it myself, but there are a number of them ranging, I think I said, from 20 megawatts, or maybe even less than that, up to 200 megawatts. And again, not all of those will be built, but a significant number of them very likely will, because this list is just the list out through 2015, and it doesn't go beyond that. So it's just the near-term plans. Certainly, there are developers, I am confident, they are contemplating plants beyond 2015. They just have not shown up in the report, because they don't need to get an interconnection permit at this point. It's just it doesn't take that long to build these projects, and so they will wait closer to the year of service. So a 2016 plant probably is not going to be looking for a permit until next year sometime. I've got the list out here, and I'm trying to locate where they are. If you can just bear with me just a second, I believe I can tell you what they are. Okay, let's see. Well, I've got the 75. Let's see if I can find the new solar stuff here. I may not be able to. I may be wasting everybody's time, but well, I can't locate it directly, but I believe it was in the May 2013 CDR. It may have been in a later update by ERCOT, but those are not just speculative units; those are ones that are in the queue. So, but again, it's relatively minimal, and they're quite a ways out. Well, next 2 years, 2014 and 2015. So I'm sorry I don't have the specific list with me.
That's all right. We will. I'm very interested in that topic also, so we'll probably host a future webinar just on some of those projects.
Okay.
The next question, Ron, is from Arthur. Is there a reference value for stored energy, dollars per megawatt hour, reference value that can be used to justify a project that transfers wind generation from nighttime to peak periods?
Oh, gosh. Well, I really, I haven't studied that in detail. I can tell you this, that the only significant storage project I know of is the Duke Department of Energy facility, battery facility out in West Texas in No Trees, I believe. I think that's a 20 megawatt, maybe it's a 30 megawatt, but it's a fairly substantial battery project. And the cost for that was right at $1,800 a kilowatt to build that. Now, if you compare that with the cost of other generating resources, it cost about over $2,000, probably more like $2,400 or $2,500 a kilowatt to build a coal plant. It costs somewhere in the $1,000 to $1,200 a kilowatt range to build a combined cycle plant. A nuclear plant is $5,000 to $7,000 a kilowatt. So $1,300 or $1,800, I'm sorry, a kilowatt is pretty cheap for storage. So that's the only reference point I know. In fact, when I saw the numbers associated with that, I was surprised that they could build storage for that low cost. Now, it's relatively small. It's certainly not going to back up 10,000 megawatts of wind. But if you project that out to a much larger or a number of facilities like that, it suggests that although it may be expensive, it's not enormous to build something like that. Now, that's going to be $1,800 a kilowatt at least, beyond the cost of building the renewables, whatever those are. If solar, it's one cost. If it's wind, it's another cost. So it is an incremental cost, but still, it's not $5,000 or $6,000 a megawatt hour. It's or megawatt capacity. So that's the only reference point I know. I would say that storage, as you probably know, is the holy grail of renewables, both for wind and for solar. And I think you're going to see a lot more storage projects showing up. You saw the recent, maybe saw the recent California mandate that retail electric providers out there provide storage capability over time. So we're moving in that direction, and certainly it is the right direction to advance the cause of renewables, no question about it.
And there was a comment posted from Chad, just a note that the Duke project in No Trees was 36 megawatts. So
okay, good, thank you.
There, and we probably have time for just a couple quick questions. We're running up against the hour. If you have a couple more minutes, Ron, is that
sure.
Okay? From James, ERCOT appears to be mounting a social media campaign. They have daily postings on Facebook and smartphone apps. Do you think they're listening to public feedback, and what is the best way to provide it?
Well, to some extent, I think they do. I mean, there's a lot of feedback to the Commission. People write letters all the time. There are those social media. That there's, if you look under PUC Project 40,000, this is the Resource Adequacy Project. There are numerous letters from business owners and customers of all types telling the PUC they want reliability or they don't want higher costs or various things, but taking positions with respect to resource adequacy. So, you know, the Public Utility Commission, unfortunately, is a very political organization, and so you know, it's hard to determine how an individual can change their or make a dent in their politics if that's what you want to do. But it certainly doesn't hurt to write to the public utility commissioners themselves, or to write to a project that it'll be posted and everybody can see it, or to write to your legislator. That sometimes produces the best result. Your senator or your representative, state senator, state representative. And there are some that are very interested in this. For instance, on one side, as I mentioned earlier, there's Troy Frazier, who is opposed to a capacity market. On the other side, there's John Corona, also a Senate committee head that's in favor of it. So you have senators on both sides of the issue as well, and you know, it's important to get your opinion to them. So that's what I would do. I think I would write to the senator, might post something if it's related to resource adequacy, might write to the Public Utility Commission and have something posted in the docket for PUC Project 40,000, and your letter will show up as one of the documents in that proceeding. And I'm confident that the commissioners read that. I know I read them, and I'm sure they read them as well. They're so they get it. They know what people are saying. But there are one unfortunate, well, maybe not unfortunate. There are groups that just file lots and lots of letters saying the same thing, and you can detect who they are. And they sort of cloud up or clog up the process with a lot of letters that all say the same thing. So I think the letter that is written by you, that is reflects your opinions and not what somebody asked you to reflect, I think that will get the most notice from the commissioners, because it will be different from the letters that they typically get from consumers that are essentially form letters.
Okay, great. Now I'll take one more question here. Who would control time of day pricing at the retail level in Texas, and why does Texas retail electricity rates tend to be flat, whereas in places like California, almost all markets at the retail level, residential level, have 2 or 4 different time of day pricing levels?
Well, yeah, well, there are some time of day deals. That's up to the retail electric provider. The retail electric provider can create essentially any sort of and by retail electric provider, I mean the Reliant or the JEXA or the Direct Energy or the TXU Energy. Those folks, they can create any sort of a rate that they would like, including time of day, as long as the system can support it. And generally in the Encore area, that is the Dallas-Fort Worth area, almost all homes have smart meters now, and so time of day pricing is certainly possible, but it's up to the retail electric providers to do that. The Public Utility Commission doesn't have essentially any authority over that, not directly at least, and so it's just a matter of whether or not the retailers think they can benefit from that. Now, if you think about it, right now TXU Energy, or just recently, I don't know if it's still in effect, but they had a free nights and free weekends or free weekends program. Well, that's essentially time of day pricing. In other words, you could get your night times, I forget the hours exactly, but late at night to early in the morning free under a certain rate during the day, and you could also get your weekends free. So that really is, it's not so much time of day price. Well, it is in one case. It's time of week pricing in one case and time of day pricing in the other. But again, that's all up to the retail electric providers.
All right, great. And with that program, I remember it was midnight to 6 a.m.
Yeah, okay, that's right.
Tuesdays.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well,